Yo, it's me. I'm Josh Paulison, and you're watching Josh Paulison. I want to talk about what programming language you should write your project in. And this is one of those questions that can become extremely exciting for people. And by that, I mean people can get really angry or upset about what people are using to write different projects in. I'm going to be trying to, not get into that. I think that there are valid reasons for those emotions, for frustrations. It's not that that's coming out of nowhere, but I also want to ask some practical questions. And even though I can have visceral responses to people writing some projects in JavaScript or things like that, I think that it's worth looking at your specific situation, your specific needs, your specific case, and figuring out what works well for you, for your context, and all of that. So let's get into that. And I have a lot of text here, so if it sounds like I'm reading a lot, then it's because I am, but you didn't hear that from me. So what programming language is best to write your project in? So for example, on my end here, there's a Unity game. And then I could also pull up, I've got these Twitch tools that are written in JavaScript. Unity game, it's C#, but these Twitch tools are in JavaScript. Why didn't I do C# for this? Why didn't I do C++ for this? Why didn't I do Perl? Why wasn't I using something else? And I want to just talk about some of the reasons for decisions that you can look at for yourself and just questions to really help guide you in that. So a few questions to just practically help you narrow this down as far as what language to work in. And here I'll put the question at the top so that you can stare at it. Whoa, what programming language should I write this in? One question is, what languages do you know? What languages do I know? So for example, it might be that the absolute best language to write something in is just C, just straight up C. And you're like, I've never used C in my life, or C++. I've never used a C-based language, and I'm scared. It's like, okay, well, you don't know that language. It might be that then you don't make the project in that language, but that's not necessarily the case. So here's the next question that will help you figure out if that is a good reason to work in a language or not work in a language. What is my deadline? Here's the reality, is that if you have no deadline, if it's a personal project, it might be best to use a language that you don't know, because that will help you learn it, that will help you expand your skill set, that will help you build up your resume, that will help you get more different types of jobs. And so if you have no deadline, if it's a personal project, looking at a language that you've never worked in before could be the absolute best thing for you. I think that the best thing that I ever did for my web programming was wrote in some C compiled to WebAssembly, because it forced me to look at things that that were common practices in web dev that people would recommend that are terrible. As an example, a recommendation for getting a file and getting every line in the file to read the whole file would be to load in the file and then use split by line break, which means that you are creating a bunch of garbage, especially if you don't care about all those lines. It's a huge waste of resources. And then doing a bunch of regex checks and caching all of that data, you are creating so much garbage. You are doing so much you're creating so much crap. And forcing myself to work in C compiled to WebAssembly, I had the file in there as in text is just numbers. So I was just looking at it as I'm trying to remember, because I was using UTF-8. I guess it was a long. I'm trying to remember. Regular chars are 16-bit. I was using ints. I should know that, but off the top of my head. But it was but I was having to work in the text in a different way that I was used to working in, and it forced me to go, why was I doing that the whole time? Oh, because that's what I was used to. Learning new languages can help you look at different ways to solve problems. It can help you look at different approaches. It's not always even just about learning a language. It can help you learn better ways to handle things in other languages, or help you realize practices that you were doing that were terrible. But that were the norm in that language because nobody talked about it. People don't often talk about performance in JavaScript. It's a reality. So if you have no deadline, it might be worth learning a new language. So if you don't know the language, that doesn't mean don't work in it. If you just said, I don't know the language, I won't work in it, you would have never learned the languages that you know in the first place, right? You have to start from a place of not knowing and then go to a place of knowing. That's just how life works. But here's another question that is very important, and I feel like I don't hear people talk about as much. What languages are other people who would be working on this most likely to know? Now, if you're the only one working on this, this isn't necessarily an applicable question. But here's an example. I was connecting with somebody who was having trouble with some streaming tools that were built in C++. He could not find anybody else to help him update his tooling, because most people who work on browser sources for OBS stream tooling are working in JavaScript, HTML, and so he had a really hard time. He was contacting everyone he could and couldn't find anybody to help him with this. I was willing to start digging into it and figuring it out, and then I was still struggling with it, and he was struggling with other people, and then we found out, like, I thought that the app was working and it was just loading into you don't need to hear the whole story. But I ended up rewriting it for him in JavaScript, because if I'm not available, the odds of somebody else being available and being able to edit it for him are much higher. And so looking at what languages other people who are working on this are most likely to know is really important, because you want for other people to be able to come in and work on it, unless you're trying to be manipulative with job security, in which case I will never hire you, screw you. But the goal is to make sure that you are making it so that your project can be grabbed and worked on by other people. I meant what I just said, by the way. Will this language be difficult or impossible to achieve my performance or functionality in? So this is also an important question, because if you're really looking at the problems that you're trying to solve, that you can't solve your problems, like if you're trying to make something extremely performant and you're like, I gotta use JavaScript, I gotta use JavaScript, I gotta use JavaScript, why? Like, if you are not able to solve your problems in the language that you're working in, you need another language. That's just reality. It's not helpful to try to fight against that. It's just not. And so then there's also the question of, in some cases, functionality, and you could extend this to packages and different things like that. If you're like, I have to use Angular, but it doesn't solve my problems. Well, if it doesn't solve your problems, then why are you using it? Don't use things that don't solve your problems. Use things that solve your problems. Your goal, your job, I love this quote from Mike Acton. He said something like, your job is not to write code, your job is to solve problems. And that's really important to remember. If you get in love with the code and you quit looking at the problems that you're actually trying to solve, you're going to go in all sorts of random directions, and you're going to be confused just like everyone else. So will it be difficult or impossible to achieve my performance or functionality? And that's a really important question. Next, what is the likelihood that I will have to port this project to another engine or programming language within the next 5 years? This might seem like a long-term, like it is long-term, it's saying 5 years, but if you're like, yeah, this is a really important project to me and I'm writing it in, like, I think that the classic example, which actually I want to talk more about it later because there are some interesting sides to it in multiple cases, but Minecraft, it was written in Java and then it got ported to C++ so that it could be used across platforms and stuff like that. And there are multiple games that have been written in JavaScript that then had to get ported to other languages or engines in order to use them properly on consoles or things like that. That's a pretty common story at this point. And what is the likelihood that you'll have to port this project to another engine or programming language within the next 5 years? And there is an interesting part to this that you could look at, and that is the word I. Because maybe for you, it's way better to work in the language that you already know and are familiar with. And if it goes really well, if it does really, really well, maybe what you want to do is that you want to pay somebody else to port it and they can deal with it. That's an option. I hate that option, but it is an option and it's worth looking at. So what is the likelihood that you will have to port this project to another engine or programming language within the next 5 years? And there's also the question of like, how long would that take? Some projects it would be a big deal, some projects not. And hopefully you're organizing your code in a way and your project in a way where it's less work. If you're using a lot of JSON templates or just templated files, templated data, it could be binary, it could be whatever, in order to get in the data so that you are less dependent on the engine. The less engine dependent you are, the easier it is to transfer over, right? If you're making all this Unity tooling or something like that, and then you're like, we can't use Unity for this, we have to port to another engine because Unity does something else exciting like they did before and everybody freaked out. Let's say that happens. Okay. If it's easier to port, you're going to be in a better way. And so being less dependent on the tooling and all of that will help you out. And so that kind of gets into number 6 a bit. What are the odds that I will regret this? If you are building your project in an engine or in a language, whatever, and you think that there is a very high likelihood that you will regret it, it's worth revisiting what the heck you're doing. And I think that the question about regret, it could be in a few different ways. It could be financially, like, man, it could be that, hey, we were writing in a language that none of us knew, and it was a slog, and it just wasted so much time. That is a type of regret, and that's important. The regret isn't necessarily, hey, we were unable to hit our performance metrics. That's important. You have to be able to hit those metrics, but also, if you are not able to work on the project because your team is not experienced, like your team is like, hey, we worked in Unity, now we're moving to Unreal because we thought we should move to Unreal, and then you don't know what you're doing because you don't know the ins and outs of Unreal and all that. If you have a team that's skilled in one area and then you're trying to pull them somewhere else, that could go really badly. It could be fine, but you're going to have different struggles regardless. And so what are the odds that you will regret this? That's a really important question. What programming language should you write this in? So I'm going to review these questions and then jump into I want to talk briefly about just the Java Minecraft thing, because I think that's an interesting case study and just talking about it a bit. And then I want to talk about some other things that might keep you from the decision, make it harder. So what programming languages should you write this in? What languages do you know? What is your deadline? What languages are other people who would be working on this most likely to know? Will this language be difficult or impossible to achieve my performance or functionality in? What is the likelihood that I will have to port this project to another engine or programming language within the next 5 years? And what are the odds that I will regret this? Now, I want to talk about Minecraft in Java for a little bit. It's interesting to me that, it's interesting to me that it was written in Java, first off. And a lot of people kind of make fun of that fact. And honestly, Java programming is probably only, like, people are learning Java programming in order to make Minecraft mods. And there are reasons to know Java programming for legacy systems, but in general, new systems, that's not the same focus, is at least my understanding. I haven't been deep in the web dev realm for a little bit, but you're not generally making new systems in Java. So Minecraft was written in Java, updates to the old Minecraft, you have to know Java, but then there's this other version, the Bedrock edition, that is in C++. Now, what if Notch had made Minecraft in C++ initially? Well, there's a few problems with that kind of thought process, and that is he might not have known how to. I don't know his programming experience in different areas. I've heard some different things, but I don't know a lot in that. But if he had never made Minecraft, because he was like, I have to make it in C++ because that's the best option, then Minecraft wouldn't exist. And I think that anybody arguing that it would have been better for Minecraft to not have existed than for it to have been written in Java, I don't think anybody would really argue that. But I feel like when somebody is starting out and they don't know what they're doing, people will make that argument of it's better for this to not exist, even though I realize this isn't the phrasing, but it sort of is this. It would be better if your project didn't exist than for you to write it in JavaScript, than for you to write it in Java, than for you to write it in whatever. And I think that's really flawed. I think that there is an aspect of you want things to hit their targets. And so the thing is that Minecraft's initial targets, it seems like you can play Minecraft for a while on Java and be fine, but there are different performance targets and such that doesn't really work well in Java. But for the current goals, it seemed like it worked. And I think that it's an interesting question for anybody's app. Like, for example, hey, we've got a lot of apps that are made with Node.js, Electron at this point, and I cringe when I see that. I see why people do it, but I struggle with it for a few reasons. One of them being that if something is so widespread, it has a huge impact. If it's using up all these computer resources, or it's taking this long to load, etc., it's having a huge social impact, and I dislike that. I dislike that it is set up in a way that provides an inferior experience when it is so widespread. Now, you don't necessarily know it will get widespread, and I think that then when it's in the language, you don't necessarily want to shift everything over. But there's this aspect of the long-term widespread impact. If Minecraft had been written in C++ initially and could have been made just as fast by the same person and done just as well, then to me it seems inarguable that it would have been better for it to have been written in C++. But if the options were Minecraft never exists or Minecraft is written in Java, I think it's better that Minecraft was written in Java. And so for your project, if the options are your project never exists, or your project is written in JavaScript, or your project is written in whatever, Perl, it's written in RPG Maker code from a version 5, like 20 years ago, whatever. Like, oh yeah, Ruby, that's what it was, wasn't it? Then it might just be worth having it exist. Now, this kind of gets into other questions again. What is your deadline? If you don't have a deadline, it might be worth learning the new stuff instead. If you have a deadline and you're trying to get something out, you got your last hurrah before you need to get back onto another project, you've got a very short time span, it might be worth just saying, okay, what languages do I know? Like, I got a tight deadline, I just need to get something out there and see if it works. Kind of do it as a prototype to see if anybody cares about this project, right? But I think there is an interesting conversation about, is it better to have bad software that exists, or is it better for that that solves a problem? Is it better to have bad software that solves a problem, or to not solve the problem at all? Is it better to solve a problem poorly or to not solve the problem at all? I would argue that in general it is better to solve the problem poorly than to not solve the problem. The question is, are you creating other problems along the way, and what is the impact of those? And I would also say that if somebody is just afraid of learning a new language, this again goes into what is my deadline. I do personally have a distaste if someone is just determined to use a language because they want to use that language, or there's some sort of like, sometimes it seems almost like there's something to prove in using a language for something. I can do this in JavaScript. Well, you don't have to. There are other options. You don't have to do that. Anyway, the main thing, these questions help you narrow down, is this worth doing? But I do want to add a few other questions into this, because if you're fighting inside over these decisions, there are a few other questions that could be worth asking. So if you're fighting inside over these decisions, ask yourself these 3 questions. So number 1, am I embarrassed about my choice? And I'm gonna read a section that I wrote, and these all have sections that I wrote just because I feel like they're kind of big, and so if it sounds like I'm reading, that's why I'm reading. Embarrassment may be an indicator of factors you haven't considered, but there's a massive shame culture within programming that doesn't benefit the conversation. Some of this is due to many hard-headed people being in the industry and personalities that often thrive. I know I speak in ways that to some is considered very harsh, and to other people is just everyday. I don't mind being told about a part of my code, this is bad, if it's from someone I respect, as long as they're willing to have a conversation about it. The reality is that, like, if you're spending a lot of time on tech Twitter or different things, you're going to see people bashing everything. People bashing JavaScript, people praising JavaScript. You could work on a project in JavaScript and you could have people telling you, why aren't you writing this in C++? What's wrong with you? And on the other hand, you could have people saying, why aren't you writing this in TypeScript? What is wrong with you? And on the other hand, you could have people saying, why aren't you writing this with Angular? What's wrong with you? And on the other hand, you could have people saying, why are you writing this at all? Just use a web builder. What's wrong with you? Like, there's just some very strong opinions, and I would say that there is a massive shame culture within programming that does not benefit the conversation. There are some people who will say this is bad or this isn't good, and they're open to a conversation, and their goal is not to be rude or mean or to have any problems with that. And so I'm not saying that everybody who is harsh or critical is bringing in the shame culture, but I would say that there is a large shame culture within programming that doesn't benefit the conversation. And again, people can use the same words and not be meaning it the same way, or be putting that with it. But if somebody's just trying to peer pressure someone else into using a language, I don't think that's healthy. I really don't. You have to look at that person's situation, what they're trying to do. You have to do that. And if you're just like, no, you shouldn't do this because you shouldn't do this, to heck with that person. Like, get rid of the shame culture. Again, I'm not saying that disagreement does not equal shame. Somebody saying, hey, you're not going to hit your performance metrics if you use JavaScript. Okay, that's valid. And that's important. Okay, that is not, like, if you can't hit your goals, then you need to change how you're trying to reach your goals. That's just a reality. But there can just be this aspect of being embarrassed. If you're just embarrassed to do a project in a specific language, that's not a valid reason to do it one way or another. It is worth exploring, is there a reason for that embarrassment? Because there might be something else that you're kind of ignoring. But embarrassment itself isn't a reason to do something or not to do something. And let's jump into number 2. And this is going to sound very odd, and I think that for some people, they're going to have an immediate reaction of, this is stupid, why would you say this? Am I weighing the factors in a logical way when weighing them in an emotional way is acceptable? And of course, there might be, when is an emotional way acceptable with programming? And I think that's a valid question, so let me throw out some of what I'm thinking. And this is, again, written, so I think this is a big deal. That probably sounds like a terrible question, but let me give you some examples when weighing something in an emotional way is probably a good thing. 1. When it's a personal project only you will ever be using and has no financial ties to it. 2. When it's for the sake of enjoying a one-day prototype that you're just trying to test the concept of. 3. When it's a project you're working on for the sake of relaxation, not for the sake of production or profit. There's a reality that it's okay to also just enjoy programming. And if you enjoy working in an unpopular programming language, or a language that doesn't solve your problems, and it's for the sake of enjoyment or relaxation, who cares? That's like going up to somebody and being like, you know what, like they're painting, and you're using really bad paints, and you're using really bad canvases, you should get this stuff if you want to be a real painter. And the person's like, I'm trying to enjoy painting right now. Get the heck out of here. Like, why are you shaming me over enjoying a hobby? And there are times when it's just acceptable to just enjoy what you're doing in programming. Like, programming is a job. It can also be a hobby, and it can also be a hobby and a job. And so there's an aspect to where it's like, hey, you know what? If your goal is to have fun with programming, and that's why you're writing this, have fun with programming. If you're working on a project on your own computer that's just for you to have some fun, if you're making a little mini game and it runs horribly, but it's just for you to have some fun and you're not looking to share it at all, okay. Like, it takes 10 seconds to load into the game and it's terrible, but you're the only one doing it because you're just trying to have some fun. That's fine. Like, it really is one of those things where, I think that this thought process gets lost, that it's valid to just enjoy life. It's totally valid to just heckin' enjoy your life and enjoy your hobby, or to enjoy a little sliver of work. And this is going to get into the next one. And this is number 3. Does it actually matter? And I think this is also something that people could have a very visceral reaction to. So let me read what I wrote. If you're at work and you want to write someone a tool in 30 minutes that one team member will use for their specific problem, and you want to make a web page with a JavaScript field to solve it, that's fine. If you want to write it up in AutoHotkey, that's probably fine. 30 minutes of time to write it means that it's probably best for someone to rewrite it anyway if it were to become a valuable project. If it would take them longer to read and rework your code than to rewrite it, who cares? And I think this is really important to look at. I've had cases where I wrote programs in really bad programming languages because it helped me solve a problem for somebody really quickly. I've made some little web pages that people can just throw in data and parse it. And the thing that's nice with that is there doesn't have to be any compilation. They can share it with whoever they want. Anybody else can edit that file if they know a little bit of web code and improve it if they need to for the person. And it meant that I was able to, within like 15 minutes, send them a little file that helped them save hours of work. If I looked at it and went, this is the wrong programming language for the job, they wouldn't have had the tool, or it would have taken me days. And technically, looking at the amount of time saved for them, it might have been, like, I could have potentially justified the cost, but there wouldn't really have been a benefit over doing that versus just having a little web page that you open. Like, what would have been the practical benefits? It's one person in an office using it on occasion. The main difference is that maybe it would have taken 1/10 of a second to open rather than half of a second or 1 second, but then they just leave it open all day anyway. It doesn't matter. And so the question, does it actually matter, is also important. If you have 1,000 people opening it up all the time and it is running thousands of queries, okay, we're starting to talk about a different context, and that sounds important. Context is really important for figuring out what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so if you're fighting inside over these questions, ask yourself, over these decisions, ask yourself, am I embarrassed about my choice? Am I weighing the factors in a logical way when weighing them in an emotional way is acceptable? And does it actually matter?